His stories were what frightened people worst of all. Dreadful stories they were, about hanging and walking the plank and storms at sea and the dry tortugas and the wild deeds and places on the Spanish Main. By his own account, he must have lived his life among some of the wickedest men that God ever allowed upon the sea. And the language in which he told these stories shocked our plain country people almost as much as the crimes that he described. So nowadays, you guys, we are so desensitized sometimes to violence because we see it everywhere. Like we have access to television, we have access on our phones, and we have access to the news, and we have access to movies even. Like we can go out and see a horror movie and see all kinds of terrible, gruesome, like bloody, gross stuff. Okay? The 1700s did not have that, so you need to remember that. These are people who have lived in the country, who have lived quiet lives, who have not seen as much as maybe a fist fight. And then here comes this old thug who suddenly talks about guys that get hung, guys that get stabbed, guys that have their guts ripped out of them, and hookers and prostitutes and thieves. And he's also swearing like a ridiculous amount. Okay. I know that quite a few of you use language that I do not approve of you using outside of school. I know this because I have caught quite a few of you using it in the hallway. So, but imagine you have never heard a swear in your life, and all of a sudden some guy comes to stay in your house, and it's like the episode of SpongeBob with the dolphin sounds, and you're like, oh my gosh, my ears, they're bleeding. Okay? So this guy is really just terrible. My father was always saying the inn would be ruined, for people would soon stop coming here to be tyrannized over and put down and sent shivering to their beds. But I really believe his presence did us good. People were frightened at the time, but on looking back, they rather liked it. It was a fine excitement in a quiet country life, and there was even a party of the younger men who pretended to admire him, calling him a true sea dog and a real old salt and such like names, and saying that he was the sort of man that made England terrible at sea. In one way, indeed, he did bade fair to ruin us, for he kept on staying week after week, and at last month after month, so that all of the money he had long been exhausted, and still my father never plucked up the heart to insist on having more. If ever he mentioned it, the captain blew through his nose so loudly that you might say he roared, and stared my poor father out of the room. I have seen him wringing his hands after such a rebuff, and I am sure the annoyance and the terror he lived in must have greatly hastened his early and unhappy death. So not only is this guy terrifying their customers, he's also not paying them. He gave them that little bit of money in the beginning and then never paid them again. So he's basically freeloading off of them in their own house, scaring their customers, scaring their people, and he's terrorizing Jim's dad basically to death. We find out that Jim's dad dies. We don't know how yet, but we know that he dies early, okay, in Jim's life. And that he is not a very brave man. Jim's dad's kind of a coward. He's kind of a wuss, okay? I mean, I'd be scared of this guy too, though, in all honesty. All the time he lived with us, the captain made no change whatever in his dress, but to buy some stockings from a hawker. One of the cocks of his hat having fallen down, meaning feathers, guys. Come on, feathers in a hat. He let it hang from that day forth, though it was of great annoyance when it blew. So he never changes his clothes, ever. And they start getting, like, holes in his clothes and all kinds of other stuff. I remember the appearance of his coat, which he had patched himself upstairs in his room, and which, before the end, was nothing but patches. He never wrote or received a letter, and he never spoke with any but the neighbors, and with these, for the most part, only when drunk on rum. The great sea chest none of us had ever seen open. All right, so that is the end of this part. We will finish the chapter in the next video.